Government fails, the world's off its rails, leaders are whacked, democracy is under attack. It's time to get smart, folks, time to get real. Let's cut through the crap, tell us how you feel. Let's cue the talent, let's meet the host. Podcast by George.
Well, hello, hi, how are you? And welcome on in to another podcast by George. Hopefully everything's working all right. We're live on the live line this morning on YouTube. Don't normally do a lot of live broadcasts, but wanted to do one this morning in particular because of this breaking report that's coming out of the IPCC, as it's called. And we're going to talk to our expert, Dr. Jerald Schnoor, about exactly what that agency is and exactly what it is they're telling us. But I've got a sense, I've got a feeling, just based on what I'm seeing, it's all bad and it's much worse than what a lot of people are reacting to tell you the truth. I mean, I'm looking at the news this morning. I'm scanning the headlines. It's there, but I don't think it's getting the significance that it should. I told people last year that this was the 2020 podcast. Basically, in 20 minutes, we can be dead from an accidental nuclear strike from a submarine that nobody even knows where it is right now, or in 20 years, we'll all be dead because of the climate crisis. And now it's 2021, so we can adjust a little bit, either side of that equation, whichever way you want. Maybe we've got 21 minutes, maybe we've got 21 years, and that's about in line, I think, with what the UN is telling us. And so that brings us to our guest, and that's why I wanted to bring him on this morning. It's Dr. Jerald Schnoor. And for folks that may not know, Jerry was the co-director and co-founder of the Iowa Environmental Focus Group. That's a product of the Center for Global and Regional Environmental Research, a nonprofit source for news, analysis, research, and commentary on the environment. It covers a range of topics, including air and water quality, climate change, extreme weather, sustainable communities, and green energy. Dr. Schnoor teaches civil and environmental engineering as well as occupational and environmental health. His specific fields of knowledge include water quality modeling, aquatic chemistry, and climate change. And this morning, he's back on the podcast by George live line. So let's see if we can bring him on in here and say good morning to Dr. Jerald Schnoor.
Morning, George.
Well, like I said, I've been out on the ledge on this for quite a while. You have a tendency to talk me back off the ledge a little bit to reel me in, but I want to bring this article up to get us started here, read a couple of paragraphs of this, and then I want to get your opinion to see where we're at. So let's see if I can do that. Okay, this is Out of Common Dreams, as you can see, and there's that one of those photographs that you see all the time. It's interesting because that photograph is not from California. That's not from the Great American West. That's from Greece. Firefighters try to put out fire as flames spread over a highway. That was on August 5th, 2021 in northern Athens, Greece. So let's read this a little bit. Code Red for Humanity. That's what they're calling this. IPCC report warns window for climate action is closing fast. Quote, the alarm bells are deafening and the evidence is irrefutable. Greenhouse gas emissions from fossil fuel burning and deforestation are choking our planet and putting billions of people at immediate risk. It's written by Jake Johnson here. It says a panel of leading scientists convened by the United Nations issued a comprehensive report just yesterday that contains a stark warning for humanity. The climate crisis is here. Some of its most destructive consequences are now inevitable, and only mass and speedy reductions in greenhouse gas emissions can limit the coming disaster. It's coming. It's not maybe. It's not probably. It's not eventually, folks. It's upon us. Assembled by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, a team of more than 200 scientists, the new report represents a sweeping analysis of thousands of studies published over the past 8 years as people the world over have suffered record-shattering temperatures and deadly extreme weather, from catastrophic wildfires to monsoon rains to extreme drought. The result of the scientists' work is a startling assessment of the extent to which human activity, particularly the burning of fossil fuels, has altered the climate, producing unprecedented planetary warming, glacial melting, sea level rise, and other changes that are wreaking havoc in every region of the globe, wiping out entire towns, imperiling biodiverse ecosystems such as the Great Barrier Reef and the Amazon rainforest, and endangering densely populated swaths of the world. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about, folks. You can see from that why I'm out on the ledge. So let's bring Jerry in here. And Dr. Schnoor, I guess I would start with the fact that the last time that I had you on the podcast, you mentioned that this IPCC should be paid attention to, that in your opinion, this was kind of the gold standard of analysis on climate change. Can you tell us a little something about this organization, this group?
Well, the group was started in 1988, and the first report was 1990, George. And what's kind of interesting is the verbiage, the so-called warnings about climate change and global warming have changed throughout time. This report is much more stark. It uses words like unequivocal, the evidence that humans are linked to it, unprecedented. And in the past, you could see each report, the 6 reports, this is the 6th one, getting more and more serious. And in fact, even since the 5th one, which the Physical Science Basis report was released in fall of 2013, even since then, the tone of the report is much more serious. Warming is happening much faster than most of the scientists thought, and even than many of the models forecast. That is, ice is melting faster. Heat waves are coming on longer and more serious. The temperature distribution across the Earth is changing faster. We're experiencing 2 or 3 times more high temperature readings at thousands of weather stations around the planet than low temperature readings. That's just one manifestation of global warming. Lots of high readings. And that's what is surprising, and that's why this report is even more dire than all the previous reports.
You know, I got to ask you, this is your life's work. And I mean, you made the decision to go into this field decades ago, Jerry. And this isn't, in some respects, some of this isn't new. I mean, this alarm bell has been rung, like I mentioned, going back to the 70s and 80s. I mean, we've been talking about it. We know that it's been coming. But what's different here? I mean, what about this current report, for instance, jumps out at you the most?
That the warming and its effects, wildfires in California, and as you showed, Greece, Turkey, my goodness, Siberia is on fire right now. It seems like half of the planet is on fire and the other half is in flood. We had Omaha this week to add to China and Belgium and Greece. Many deaths. And so again, the effects of climate change are happening faster than previously forecast and thought. And that's why the report is so important and hopefully alarming to people, because as you said, climate change is powerfully upon us, but we're running out of time in order to respond to it. For example, the ice melting. When ice shelves break off of the Antarctic, those ice shelves have taken 1, 2, 3,000 years to form. And the report uses the word, for the first time, I think, irreversible. These changes, some of them are irreversible on any time scale that humans would care about. We're talking about thousands of years to put that ice back up on Antarctica if we can turn this thing around.
Let me see if I can bring this back up on screen very quickly here, because there was a chart that I didn't show that I would like to show here. Let's see if I can bring this back up. Scroll down here a little bit. Okay. Now, this is going to be small on screen for folks, but this gets to something that an argument that you hear all the time, that this is a part of an ongoing trend, that it's been happening forever, and it's natural. Some of the deniers will say, and there's nothing that we have done that's responsible for it, and maybe more importantly, there's not much that we can do to correct it. Well, look at this chart. Now, the left-hand side of this is throughout history. I mean, this is going back, well, not all recorded history, but it's going back to the past couple of thousand years. And it says warming is unprecedented in more than 2,000 years, the warmest multi-century period in more than 100,000 years, it's showing. But look at this chart. Look, here we go. And right over here on the right side of this, where my little cursor is, 1850, kablooey. Look at this thing going up. And then over here it says, this is just from 1850, then a little expansion of that to 2020. And this compares the man-made, human and natural causes compared to man-made effects. So if you look at the little blue area here, this is what normally would have happened. This is what's caused because we're here. And I mean, this is just data. This is not opinion. It's fact. So I just wanted to show that chart that was up there. And Jerry, I know you've looked at this. This is a lengthy report. Obviously, there's a lot of information in this. I'm just hitting the high spots here with an article. But when you dig into it, when you look at it, are they making any recommendations for the rest of us what needs to be done first and foremost? I know they're still referencing this 1.5 degree temperature increase, and they're telling us, from what I saw, that has to be adhered to. And it doesn't look like we're doing anything that's going to make that happen, that we're going to hold the line on that.
I agree. I'm not optimistic that we will be able to do that. That came out of the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015, when vulnerable, poor, and affected countries begged, really, truly begged, I was there, that we lower the goal from 2 degrees Celsius, that's 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit, down to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And scientists and others knew that would be very difficult, even at the time. And now I think this report is telling us it's virtually impossible unless we drastically change our actions and move towards renewable energies and stop burning coal, oil, and natural gas. The 1.5 degrees Celsius is 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit, and we're already at about by my recollections, about 1.2 Celsius. That's about 2.2 degrees Fahrenheit warmer, averaged over the whole Earth over all the seasons. Don't forget that the Arctic is warming much faster than we are here in the mid latitudes. They're around 4 degrees Fahrenheit warmer already, while we're sitting here at 2.1 or 2.2 degrees Fahrenheit warmer. Our nights are much warmer. They don't cool off anymore. Our winters are shorter. We have a longer growing season. There are some positive aspects, I guess, for Iowa farmers. But in general, we used to say there will be winners and losers. That's really not true anymore. It looks to me like we're all losers when Siberia is burning and the public has to pay for the costs of CAL FIRE and putting out the fires and cleaning up after the floods and the hurricanes. Hurricane Laura, the derecho last year in Iowa, has already cost $11 billion to recover from that. When do we realize that no action is much, much more expensive than really taking action and transforming our economy into something that can go for centuries from here. You know, I tell my students the fossil fuel age, it's been a good run, George. I
Yeah.
mean, you know, we've done our manufacturing, we've built our homes, we've powered our cars, we've made the clothes that we have, all with coal, oil, and natural gas. But the consequences, the economists call it negative externalities. The consequences are heavy upon us now, and we have to come up with a new shtick. And we better do it really soon. That's what this report is about.
That's well said. We're spoiled. I mean, like you say, we've had a great run. You know, I'm able to run up and down the interstate and play hockey in the summertime, believe it or not. And, you know, we're all in this together. We're all responsible, some more than others. Industry is really responsible. Big ag, the military. I'm going to have somebody on from Code Pink here tomorrow. Marcy Winograd is going to be on to talk about the military's role in climate warming and how they have to address it. They're kind of the elephant in the room. Nobody wants to talk about it because everybody wants to feel safe, and we're ultra patriotic in this country right now. Nobody wants to criticize the U.S. military complex, but they have a huge role to play in this. And it's been going back for decades, as I mentioned, Jerry. I mean, I've been following this and reading the stories. And the other thing that I've been telling people on the podcast is I've always suspicioned that this could be much worse, much more quickly than what people were thinking, because every report that I saw out of every climate scientist over the last 30 years probably has always had the caveat that the estimates, which were dire, were conservative. They always say that this is a conservative estimate. Is that because scientists are conservative by nature, in your opinion, or they just don't want to frighten people, or does it just have something to do with the modeling and data?
I think scientists tend to be conservative. You know, even in my laboratory, I tell the students, once you get a result that is maybe somewhat surprising, you have to do it over and over and over again. You always start with the recognition that this result is wrong. And then until you completely prove to yourself that the result stands, that you have to be skeptical. So I would say all scientists are skeptical. And this particular report had 234 scientists all around the world contributing. And that means that all 234 have to agree with what's in there. And that tends to be a lowest common denominator, to get everybody to agree to exactly how it's stated. It ends up becoming quite conservative. Another example of the conservative nature of the report, George, is that it doesn't talk much about still abrupt climate change. What if all of a sudden a huge chunk of Antarctica breaks off? What if all of a sudden we have a heat wave over Greenland that melts a quarter of the ice on Greenland? You know, then we're talking about sea level rise on the order of meters, or many, many feet, instead of what we're talking about now, perhaps 3 feet by the end of the century. Things like abrupt climate change have to do with the Atlantic meridional AMOC circulation. That is the Gulf Stream that goes up and keeps Europe warm. It seems to be weakening, and it's unstable right now. If that Atlantic circulation, because of the cold water coming down from Greenland off of the ice melt, forces the jet stream down and causes the circulation to stop that conveyor belt, there will be a much different, much colder Europe, much warmer mid latitudes in Africa and the Caribbean. So these improbable but possible nonlinear changes are not really accounted for in the report. And that's because the probability is low, but the consequences are large, and we don't really know how to deal with that. It is a conservative report, I would say.
Oh my God. Well, if you view it through that lens, through that context, I don't know. I got half a foot off the ledge here. And you may see the banner running on the bottom of the screen, folks. I want to encourage everybody to, ask questions of Dr. Schnoor as we go along here, because I just, I'm just a man on the street kind of guy. I just have questions like everybody else. And I started off by talking about the 2020 world, 2021 world that we're living in. And I've got a couple of comments here from Haza. And they're buying into exactly that. And what they're saying, Jerry, the comment here is the military is the biggest polluter. It should be the first we talk about getting rid of. And the next comment says China has got a thorium reactor going. The U.S. should go back to the drawing board and not make it about blowing stuff up. Okay, I'm all about that. I mean, particularly if we need to find funding for this, I think we can close some military bases. We can shut down some of the military spending to find billions of dollars, maybe trillions of dollars to save us all. But to this point about, do you know what a thorium reactor is and what China's doing? You have any idea what that's about?
Yeah, a thorium reactor is a nuclear reactor which does not produce transuranics, and it's much safer. Thought to be would be more modular. It could be considered a new generation of nuclear reactors, and I think it is something that should be explored. In fact, I think nuclear has to be considered in the solution mix for this very serious problem. However, I've also said on your show, George, that nuclear power, because of the long lead time in siting and permitting and construction, it's not going to help us in these next, we're down to 8 or 9 years when we have to have a 50% decline in emissions. We still haven't even begun to get the emissions curve to start to go down. So I do think nuclear is an important part of the message, and we should look at nuclear power as a baseline power, and thorium reactors and other forms of modular fission reactors would be much safer than what we've done in the past, and would not be able to have meltdowns like we've had in the past at Fukushima in 2011. So many advantages. We should look at nuclear, but it ain't going to help us in this next quick transition that we need to go to 50% decline in emissions. We need wind. And here in Iowa, what the missing piece is solar. We need utility scale solar. You make more on an acre of land with solar photovoltaics now than that marginal acre of land growing anything in Iowa. The land is valuable. We should be putting solar cells on it. We should be putting solar cells on every warehouse and rooftop in the state. Solar goes really well with wind power in Iowa. We're a leader in wind power, but often when the wind isn't blowing, the sun is shining, like today. And we should be going big time into solar, not only in Iowa, but all across the world. And that's what we need in this next 8-9 years out to 2030 to get 50% decline in emissions. Also battery storage and a better grid to transport the energy.
Yeah, we talk about the wind energy. If folks can probably see that ceiling fan behind Dr. Schnoor there. His air conditioning went off right before we decided to do this show. And Jerry, you're probably aware today is the 1-year anniversary of that warthog from hell derecho that came through the state of Iowa. You already mentioned it once and caused so much damage. And I've had Dr. Bill Gallis from Iowa State University on the show. I was surprised to find out that derechos aren't anything new, that they've been around for a while. But I got to tell you, folks, I mean, I've been a news hound. I've been following the weather in this state for, God, I hate to admit it, but probably the better part of 50 years. I never saw a derecho before, nothing like what came through here last year. I know that that's got to be related to the change in the climate. And before we leave the topic of solar, Jerry, we've got these huge farms. Anybody that's been up in the northern part of the state, particularly, or northwestern part of Iowa, my God, the size of the farms up there and the farm equipment and the scale of the agriculture operations. And of course, if you've ever seen a CAFO, my God, what a filthy mess that is. But I guess my question is, do you have any idea what the largest solar farm is in the state of Iowa right now? And the reason I ask that is, what would happen if you put solar panels out over 1,000 acres, or some of these fields, I think, are several thousand acres? What would, what would be the upside of that? What would be the downside of that?
Well, utility scale solar is what how people call it. There are discussions right now to build one at the old Dwayne Arnold Energy Center in Palo, Iowa.
Yeah.
We're talking about 4,000 acres or so to make a decent amount of like what a power plant would normally have, a coal-fired power plant. I think the largest one right now in the United States is, of course, in the Western United States. It's about 550 megawatts. That would put it on a par with the largest coal-fired power plants ever built in Iowa, larger than that. So for a few thousand acres, you can make maybe $800 an acre. That's more than we're making on corn right now in terms of the payment to the landowner, the land rent, as we call it. And it's very attractive. We should be moving that way, especially on marginal lands. We need utility scale solar, and we need it on every empty rooftop and warehouse roof and parking lot. Park your cars under it. They'll be cooler. And hey, charge up your electric vehicle while you're at it.
Well, and I'm just kind of following the comments here. Isaac mentioned another thing here that is key. I mean, it's really big. We're subsidizing big ag in this country. We're subsidizing the military, like I mentioned, like you can't talk about. And our contributor says solar is very common here, but the subsidies aren't what they used to be when they were introduced. The buyback has gone to zero. Again, I don't know exactly what the buyback was, but I know what they're saying, and that is that government has got to get involved in this big time, got to get more involved than it is currently. The Biden administration, I mean, a lot of people are glad as hell that Trump is gone, myself included, but folks, he's got to move. And I mean, he's got to move fast. The United States has to take a lead in this. And I don't know. Is that a valid argument, Jerry, that the spending needs to be stepped up on the part of the government, and particularly when it comes to solar? Are we not underwriting this to the extent that we were when we, back in the 70s and 80s, for instance?
Your viewer is right. We still do have some credits on solar, but the purchase agreements, the power purchase agreements, and the buybacks by big utilities are regulated by the Iowa Utilities Board, and they're allowed to, now they've been gradually giving less favorable rates to homeowners who have solar PV on their roof in selling back into the grid. Now, there's lots of arguments on both sides. I don't know if you want to get into all that today, but yes, I'd say it is less favorable than it was a while ago. Electric vehicles also, many of the subsidies are off. If you buy a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, you can still get a very significant tax credit, but for a regular hybrid vehicle, it's zero now.
Well, I mean, we could talk about that. I also wanted to talk a little bit about nuclear. I tell people all the time, I'm kind of a redneck hippie. I mean, I'm out of this. You can't see because I don't have any hair, but I mean, I'm a child of the 70s, Jerry. And I mean, I hate nuclear power. I mean, always have. I mean, I've kind of been taught that. But where we're at right now, I'm coming around to what you're talking about. From a baseload perspective, we need it because a lot of these other energy generating solutions pollute and are not, they use energy, and they're just not the kind of solution that we're looking for. Now, nuclear is clean, but it's the waste, of course, that has always been the problem. We really don't know what to do with it. We never have. The way that I look at it maybe is, in order for us to survive, let's use it, contain the waste, put a sign up wherever it's contained, basically, and say, here, future generations, we had to do this. We don't know what the hell to do with it. We hope that you do, and see what comes from it. I mean, that's how simplistic I am. What's your take on that?
I don't think you're so far off, George, because we have to store these transuranics from the current nuclear waste. And I should add defense wastes too. We have nuclear waste no matter what we do with the power industry. We call that the commercial nuclear wastes. But and the commercial nuclear wastes, by the way, are much, much, much smaller in volume than the military nuclear waste. So we got to deal with this no matter what. I think we've been reticent, we've been slow, we've been haphazard with coming up with a solution. I do believe we could put it in a basalt or salt dome or a very stable geologic formation. We could even run it down on tracks and have it retrievable storage, in that in future generations we may have the technology to reprocess that and turn it into more fuel. So I think we haven't been able to bite the bullet on that, but I think we have to learn how to store our nuclear waste. Right now, we have over 100 sites in the United States that have nuclear waste stored above ground in dry casks, if it's been around a long time, and even in wet pools of water at the nuclear power plants. And that, to me, is much less safe from the standpoint of terrorism or an accident. It's much less safe than if we could put it at the bottom of, like, Yucca Mountain on a rail car deep in the earth in a basalt formation and have retrievable storage, or cover it up. It's probably safe there, to be honest with you. We just haven't been able to get the political and public will to do that.
Well, it may be safe. It's still going to be there for thousands of years. I'm just hoping sometime some future society can say, hey, we know how to use that. Go in there and get it and do something with it. But I mean, maybe that's more science fiction.
You might enjoy this story, George. I was on a panel years ago for the Battelle Waste Isolation Project, what to do with the defense wastes. And they have to be stored for 40,000 years or more, these transuranics. And we said, well, how do we mark the site after we deep six it? And there was a lot of discussion. Well, the English language is only 1,000 years old. Recorded history, if you go back to the cave drawings, is only 6,000 years old. Humans really have only evolved in the last 100 or 200,000 years. We have to store the waste on that order. And so we decided we would build obelisks to mark the site. And what language do you put? Because English is only 1,000. So we decided to put hieroglyphics on the obelisks, like do not eat, do not dig. And that's the bizarre nature of nuclear waste storage that we have to come up with solutions for.
Well, we're running out of time here. I kind of want to get to our wrap up. And I guess I always go back to the media. It's responsible for so much of where we're at, where we've been, where we're going. I expect to turn on the news this morning, for instance, and scan the headlines and see nothing but this, because really everything else, I tell people, is gingerbread. If we don't address this particular issue, that's what we're going to be as humans on this planet. We're going to be gingerbread, folks. And I wanted to ask you this question, Jerry. I mean, you know, people all over the world, you certainly have students, faculty, and friends in the western part of the United States, as an example. The West is not only burning up, it's running out of water. And as you mentioned, you're less optimistic than you used to be. This report is very alarming. What do you tell your friends, family, and faculty and students and stuff out in the Western U.S.? What's your advice to them right now?
You raised a very good point about the water, and I want to come back to that. But first of all, I tell my students right now in California, my son lives in the hills behind Monterey, California. He had to evacuate his house for 10 days last summer. Thank God for CAL FIRE. These people work so hard, George.
Yeah.
You just wouldn't believe it. They saved his neighborhood. He's back there now, but of course there's still fire danger. But right now in California, there's many locales that are uninsurable for fire. In other places like Lake Charles, Louisiana, due to hurricanes, there's places that are uninsurable. Miami is moving that way. Uninsurable is the first step towards uninhabitable. We're seeing, with climate change powerfully upon us, we are seeing the beginnings of an uninhabitable planet. Millions of climate refugees, and it's very, very serious. Water may be the manifestation of that climate change in the West, which causes people to move first. But it's another sign of uninhabitability. God help us if we hand over to our kids and our grandkids an uninhabitable planet.
Well, when it comes to that water issue, I look at that and I see these reports coming out that they're running out of water in some communities. I mean, we're talking out of water, folks. Well, there's nothing in the science that people think, well, it'll come back. I don't know how. It'll rain. There's nothing to indicate that it's going to. I mean, this is a long-term trend, perhaps, and those places are just going to be uninhabitable. And of course, the Great Migration begins. So folks in this part of the country, in the northern part of the United States in particular, it looks to me like in maybe the next few years, but certainly the next few decades in my life, we're going to have a lot of new neighbors, Jerry.
It does look like a more safe place to be in the future. Yes.
Well, perhaps that's our stopping point. I want to thank you again for coming on the podcast by George. I want to thank all of our comments that came in. Those were good questions. And I guess I always like to give you the last word here, as you, particularly on the heels of this UN report, any last observations that you want to put on the show here?
My last word is always one of hope. I'm still a redoubtable optimist, and I believe that we will make this transition because we have to, and it will result in cleaner air, healthier people, less lost time at work. It will be a much better world. The jobs that will be created by the things that we've outlined in this podcast will be the engine for economic opportunity, for wealth, prosperity, and a much better future if we respond.
That's the key. We got to respond, and our government has to take initiative, and we got to follow. I mean, I would love to see Joe Biden come out and say, you know, he's got to preach to the choir that he's got, basically. There are people that are going to deny vaccines. They're going to deny climate change, and there's no point trying to convince them. I mean, I just wouldn't go there. If I were Joe Biden, if I were our elected representatives that understand this, and supposedly they do, they get elected on that basis. They raise money for their elections and re-elections on that basis. I am calling on them to say, look, we told you the truth about vaccines. You believe that, right? You understand the science behind that. Now I'm calling on you because of this, because this is a more grave danger, maybe even than the pandemic. It's going to wipe out humanity in large portions of the globe, and we need to address this. If you believe me on the vaccines and on the pandemic, you got to believe this, and we've got to use science, and we've got to take action and respond, as Dr. Schnoor says. Doc, thanks again, Dr. Schnoor, for always coming on Podcast by George.
Thanks, George.
Folks, I hope you like this special broadcast. It's Dr. Jerry Schnoor on the Podcast by George live line. And if you do, you've seen the little ticker run across the bottom of the screen, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe on YouTube. Share this every place that you can and help get the world notified, because the word's out, folks. I mean, this UN report is dire and it is to be believed. But that's going to do it. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is for this edition of Podcast by George, and there ain't no more. We'll see you next time. Thanks.